Today we're looking at an early Mamod SE1, a pre-war engine made between 1937 and 1939. When I first got this engine, it was in pretty rough shape. I stripped it down, cleaned everything up and gave it a fresh coat of paint. Visually it's come a long way, but there's one big problem: it still doesn't run. So today we're going to investigate what's going on and see if we can get this historic little engine running again. The main issue appears to be excessive wear in the crank and cylinder pivot points. These pivots are supposed to keep everything properly aligned while allowing just enough movement to minimize friction. But as you can see, there's far too much play. When force is applied, the movement is obvious, and when the flywheel is turned over, the cylinder actually lifts from the standard. The parts move out of alignment, bind up, and that's exactly why this engine refuses to run. Let's take a closer look and see how we can fix it. The first step is to deal with the worn pivot holes. I am drilling these out oversize and then tightly fitting brass plugs are pressed in with some thread lock for additional hold. Once in place, I leave these plugs in for a couple of days for the thread lock to set in the cold workshop. The excess length of the plugs is filed down. I then drill the two pivot points back to the correct size. You can see at the orientation I've drilled the holes, a large amount of material is coming off this front, not much at the back, and in this back corner it's not touched at all. So I'll keep taking cuts until I clean it up completely. That should make that in the same orientation as these, or perpendicular to this orientation that I drilled the holes. I put this back together and the wobble has gone. There's still a little bit of play there, that's kind of what you want. And it turns over fairly freely. But we've got this this gap at the back here still, which is no good because it's just going to let the steam out. So what I'm going to do is, we've got a fair distance between the end of the rod and the flywheel, so I think I'm going to have to machine off a little bit of the cylinder just to make a flat surface against a flat surface again, and I think I'm going to do that in a milling machine. So let's head over there. So I put the axle of the piston or cylinder into the drill chuck and then pinched it up in the vise and then released it, just so I know that it's as close to vertical as I can get. I didn't really want to squash this cylinder. It's made of sort of brass or something similar, so I just used like a wood packer there. Probably a bit too big, probably not a good idea, but it seems solid enough, so we're going to go with that and see what happens. Learn by doing. This axle here is a push fit, so I'm just going to pull that out and clean this surface and mark it up with blue and get a cutter in the milling machine, or get a mill, and then I'll come back and we'll cut this until all the dye's gone. can see it's taken off the high spots and the low spots are still left. That's taken off about 0.3 of a millimetre so far. So I'll keep going until that's fully cleaned up, and then we'll assemble it again, I guess. So it's back together, and it does appear like the cylinder is perfectly flat against a flat standard. It does bind up still. So around here this feels like there's a tight spot. I'm going to play with that. I think I'll flip the piston over 180 degrees. I think maybe the piston rod is slightly bent. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Consider subscribing for free to stick around for similar content. After running a reamer down the cylinder, the movement freed up and the engine now runs. Due to the wear in the piston, this engine could probably do with a hotter burner to allow it to run faster, and in future perhaps even a new piston. It is good to see this bit of history working again, and I think this engine will make a tidy display item. Thanks for watching.